Hill. I now call on Jim Fairlie, who will be followed by Stephen Kerr. Again, 4 minutes, please, Mr Fairlie.
Presiding Officer, I'd like to congratulate my colleague Paul McLennan on securing today's debate, and I happily support his continued efforts in raising the awareness of the issue, despite it continuing to blight our society. Too little focus or attention is given to changing the culture which allows it to continue unabated. 2 weeks ago, I spoke in the Government's debate on International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, and I emphasised the role we men must play in changing the culture, and as I usually do, I shared that speech as widely as I could on social media. We all use these platforms to convey all sorts of messages, and this chamber is exactly the place to raise those messages. And for example, I have posted in the past my dismay at photographs of boxes or eggs that have displayed a Union Jack in them rather than a saltire in defence of a Scottish brand. My social media account explodes. I switch off the sound notifications because it literally doesn't stop for days on end. The outrage and sheer fury from the grossly offended are palpable and can set off a chain sideshow of explosions that continue in my notifications sometimes for weeks. And yet, I post a speech about the savagery of male violence against women and girls, about sexual assault, rape and murder, and how we males must take a stand on behalf of women and girls, and ask how we help to change things. And what is the response? Muted at best. Where was the anger? Where was the outrage? Where was the explosion of fury of support for women and girls and condemnation of male violence perpetrated against them? Sadly, and even more predictably, the outrage and fury didn't materialise. Social media can be a powerful tool to raise awareness, to start debate and to engage with people whose opinions often differ with our own. And as long as we're able to hold that space for those debates to happen with fairness and without vitriol, as I often see, we should continue to engage in all political matters online, but especially this one. Now, I know that this discussion is painful and uncomfortable for men. There's a fear that by sticking your head above the parapet, you might draw attention to yourself, and someone somewhere reminds you about a time when you may have been that guy. So better not to be reminded or risk the embarrassment. But if we all admit that at one point or another, most males will have done something that would now give us pause and forced us to accept that difficult and uncomfortable memory and a version of ourselves that when we know that we most definitely were that guy. And if we all admit it together and to ourselves, it will become easier to identify it in the next generation of boys and men and stop it at its root. Part of this is the growing up process in a patriarchal system which not only doesn't condemn this behaviour, it actively encourages it in all the ways that I spoke about 2 weeks ago. Most of us growing up with these behaviours, and we can chalk it up to experience, to growing up, or whatever we want to call it, but some men never grow up. Let's not forget that even if we do grow or learn, at whose expense does it come? Because when men are doing all that growing up and learning, it's women they are trying those behaviours out on, and it's women who are learning that they need to protect themselves and cannot know which of these boys will grow out of it, and for them, who's it going to escalate it from? There's a real issue that needs to be addressed about ignoring male violence against women and girls, and it's something that others do and therefore isn't our problem. Unless, of course, it happens to be one of our own, or it happens to be someone that the media deem worthy of wall-to-wall coverage. And as I said, this conversation should make us all feel at least a little bit uncomfortable. If we're going to be honest and be honest with ourselves, we all know exactly what I'm talking about. We learn the boundaries. We know what flirting is. We know what a compliment is. We know when the interaction is accepted and reciprocated. It is actually really obvious to all of us. But we also know what no means. We know when our embarrassment leads to aggression or inappropriate continuation of advances. And we also all know someone in our group as we grew up who might just have been capable of going that bit further than they should have, and we say nothing about it because that's not what guys do. This is a difficult debate for us to have as men, I know that, and there's no doubt about it, but by avoiding it, we enable society to continue to be muted at the misogyny, sexism, objectification, violence and sexual assault, rape and murder of far too many young women and girls every year. I believe that we can and we must do more to change it. We can change the culture, by example, by crossing the road and give women space. We remain respectful in every setting. We use appropriate language. We take that 8 seconds of discomfort and calling it out, which is made all the easier by the phrase, "Don't be that guy." We teach our sons what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, and how not to cross the line. And as importantly, we teach our daughters not to accept that line being crossed. I firmly believe that huge impacts can be made when small changes are made by the many, and I call on everyone to be that bit more mindful, to recognise these behaviours. We know how to when we cross the line, and create a different culture to bring up the next generation of boys to men. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Fairlie. I now